the whole point of looking for standards, measuring impact, obviously goes back to also what data do we actually have, and that is an excellent segue to bring in Augusta Senenssie. She's head of research at Walinda Lingo. So maybe this whole data question and nature-based solution seems to be a really big issue. Can you walk us through a little bit what kind of your view is or your experience? How can data be used to support finance flows and nature-based solutions?
So I think it might be helpful if I explain a bit more about what I do. So I head research at Walinda Lingo. It's an ethnographic research consultancy, and we focus on Indigenous and displaced people in Africa and the Pacific. But I also work as a data research analyst in the financial services. And so what we do is we scout alternative data sets for buy-side clients and invest and consult with them about which data is best for their kind of investment practices. And so I kind of have these two really interesting hats that seem to marry together quite well. And I guess when we're talking about kind of green financing, there's a number of things that I have to say, especially as the young representative on this stage. I'm very encouraged by the conversations that we've had at COP, but it has been incredibly exclusionary. There is still a massive contingent and group of young people that haven't had a real meaningful inclusion in the conversations. And when we talk about concepts like nature-based solutions, of course it's great, but even the solutions that we're suggesting today are very much top-heavy. And a lot of the innovations, the things that we're looking for in addressing climate change, inequality, Indigenous voices and representation, they exist in these communities already. These communities are trying to make headway in investment and in financing, and it's just the red tape and the bureaucracy that's preventing them from doing that. And I can list a number of examples of working with Indigenous groups in Australia, the Maasai tribes in Kenya, Indigenous and rural farmers across Ghana, and the story is still the same. We have these ideas and these solutions, we're working in our communities, we just don't have an entry point to kind of scale this and to help our communities in a long way. And I think when we're talking about how do we measure impact and how do we approach these groups, I think microfinancing has to be the key way that we do this. And we need to make sure that there is a bridge between those communities and groups so that they can bring about positive change. Now, from a data perspective, I think it's really good that we're seeing a lot of big countries, powerful countries, looking to share their data. So one of the things that we've been looking at work is the proposals under the G20 Data Gap Initiative, which is basically where G20 states and a few countries across Latin America and in Africa are sharing their data on key kind of indicators. So looking at concepts like climate change, household distribution information, financial technology, and financial inclusion data. And using that, and hopefully the idea is that by having more kind of comprehensive data that's shared across different stakeholders and groups, we can come up with meaningful kind of financial interventions for at-risk communities and groups. What I will go back to again, I'll touch on nature-based solutions one more time. Early this week, I sat in a really interesting discussion with the NDN Collective, and they are a group of Indigenous activists and legislators, researchers, academics across the Americas. And one of the key things that they were mentioning, especially when it comes to land and to kind of reforestation, is the fact that Indigenous people are still very much excluded from these conversations. Governments and corporations are using nature-based solutions as justification to basically land grab and to strip Indigenous people of their rights and access to actually exercise their knowledge and their traditions in preserving and protecting these ecosystems. And I think that's something that is quite concerning, is trying to make sure that we don't just greenwash everything, we don't just say all the cool buzzwords and the things that we think consumers want to hear, especially because I think, especially amongst the young consumers, we are the most engaged and switched on. It's us that are kind of driving the petitions, that are calling corporate bad actors out, you know. We see the amazing protests and movements of organizations like Extinction Rebellion and other groups trying to tackle the great kind of inequities, and I think the slow rate of change that we're seeing from big corporations and institutions. And as someone that's kind of balancing the hat between a researcher and consultant and working in the financial services, I see it as well in investor kind of conversations with hedge funds, asset managers, seeing that kind of hesitance to kind of take on data sets that might have to change their investment strategy. And I think we definitely need to disrupt that more.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As usual with these type of discussions, We could probably talk for hours. Unfortunately, we have very limited time today. So it was fascinating to hear. Thank you for the panelists. We heard about the greening on finance, a lot of initiatives on its way. We heard there are quite a few already ongoing opportunities in Kenya. We heard about the need for blended finance, but also I think we heard a lot, there's still quite a few challenges out there. One of the key barriers seems to be what standards are we using and how do we solve the data problem. So unfortunately, we don't have more time to really discuss it, but thank you all very much for the panel.